Before we get started, I just want to do an acknowledgement that we're gathered on the unceded homelands of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations, and we thank them for their hospitality. My name is Colleen Cole. I work at the Vancouver Public Library in various departments. Tonight I'm down here working for programming, and I'm very happy to be here for tools to help you create. So this is the last of a three-part series that we've had here this month. That's been made possible by the BC Alliance for Arts and Culture. We owe them a lot of gratitude for coming and joining us. A couple of housekeeping things before we get started. Obviously, just if you have any devices or phones, if you can just set them to silent or turn them off, just so that we don't have the disruptions during presentation. Washrooms, we have trans-inclusive washrooms that are located. If you go outside and you just go to literally the opposite end of the floor, you're going to find the washrooms there. And we are going to be live streaming, so we're going to be doing video and audio. And if you have any questions or concerns about privacy, if you want to have any questions taken off camera, just let us know. We can do that at the very end. The camera's right here, but if you have anything, it will be going on audio and it will be live streamed. So a little bit of background about the BC Alliance for Arts and Culture. They're a nonprofit provincial organization. They've been working since 1986 to advocate, inform, connect, and serve BC's creative community. Their members include organizations, professional associations, not-for-profit groups, artists, and cultural workers throughout British Columbia. Tonight we have one of their members here with us. Jordan Matthew Yerman is a Vancouver-based writer, photographer, and artist who has worked and presented in over a dozen countries. His work has appeared in numerous publications, including BuzzFeed. He has presented at the International Symposium on Electronic Art in Hong Kong and Colombia, as well as Bill and Product YBR here in Vancouver. His artwork explores questions around human, plant, and machine relationships. He's also the creator of Misunderstood, which explores the tense relationship between performer and AI language translator, as well as the co-creator of Street Cat Photo Booth, which helps feral cats post selfies to social media. So if you want to find out more about Jordan and his work, you can visit his site at www.jordanmatthew.com. So please join me in giving Jordan a really warm welcome.
Thanks everyone for coming out straight after work and school to join us here in the library. I actually love this space very much. This is part of the Digital Ladders series. This is digital tools to help you create. So when you start down the path of art making, it's actually super scary at first. You don't have, if you're right out of school, if you're right out of training, or if you've had no training, you find yourself in the wilderness a little bit. You don't have a lot of resources behind you. You might have no resources behind you. And your ability to improvise and unearth the tools to help you bring what's in here and here out here is going to shape not only the direction of your work, but it's also going to shape the voice with which you bring that work to life. So in embracing a DIY ethos, you'll not only stray from what's considered professional or sometimes even acceptable, you'll also find yourself in the same realm as many visionaries who have come before and who have probably influenced you in some way. For example, Robert Rauschenberg, who uses mixed media to go beyond just canvas, way into three-dimensional space. He's used everything from truck parts to sheep to make art. And if you ever have a chance to see a retrospective on this guy's stuff, it's amazing. Of course, Patti Smith, who's my creative and artistic hero. She's a pre-punk musician, who's a poet and mixed media artist. There isn't even a word for the genre in which she works and is still working in. She's absolutely fantastic. I love Patti Smith, and I think about her every time I get stuck on a project. We can't forget John Waters, a guerrilla filmmaker who has gone to outrageous lengths to get his projects made. And the weirdness of his work is the stuff of legend. His film financing techniques apparently include shoplifting, and the stuff that he and his cast do to get a given shot could and they probably should be their own talk. Also, when we talk about creating tools to create art, we can't forget hip-hop culture. Basically, all of hip-hop culture was hacked together by very, very creative and very, very resourceful people in New York City. Electronic equipment was kind of cobbled together to create a new way of throwing a party and expressing oneself through music. And in fact, Power Lunch changed the entire direction of hip-hop. In 1977, New York City had this citywide blackout, and over 16,000 stores were looted in one night. And according to several oral histories of hip-hop, including those of Grandmaster Flash and DJ Grandmaster Kaz, a lot of the stuff that got looted was high-end audio equipment, which found its way into the hands of hip-hop crews, who were then able to take their game to the next level. Now, I'm not condoning the theft of property from entities that by definition enjoy surplus, but, just to be clear, but Daddy needs a new tripod, Best Buy. Now we're going to find ourselves on Polaroids behind the counters of every big box store in Vancouver. Nice. So I shouldn't have to tell you who these guys are. They used to show up for the gigs, the Ramones, with their guitars in plastic shopping carrier bags because they had basically nothing. And Julia Gordon, the woman who photographed and helped design the no wave and punk movements, is a master of DIY artwork, using what you can to create graphic design and taking photos with a lot of her work was with Polaroid cameras and what we would consider low-end cameras. She's still making art when she's not busy teaching these skills to new generations. So when we look at artists like this, we look at people who have gone not only outside the mainstream, but outside of what people even considered art at the time. So as you go to make art, you've got to be ready that, you know, some people won't understand what you're doing. Some people are going to hate what you're doing. Some people are going to be allergic to what you're doing. My name is Jordan. I trained and worked as an actor for several years. I've performed in about 6 or 7 different countries. And my work as an actor involved a lot of DIY theater, off Broadway and that kind of area, as well as larger spaces, including the West End and the National Theatre of the Netherlands. But all that DIY stuff teaches you how to be resourceful. When you have to Arya Stark your way over a raw iron fence carrying a tree to bring it into your theater space. Eventually, the practices that I got into to augment my theater work took on lives of their own and eventually eclipsed that work, and that's where I am now, working mostly in photography and writing. Really, the more I grew as an artist, the more I saw what was possible if you weren't afraid to make it a little less pretty. You know, you have to give yourself permission to let your artwork look a little bit like shit sometimes, and that's totally fair. And that's really hard to do. I write personally mostly for the tech and travel sectors. Those in the who deal with the airline industry may know my writing from Apex Experience magazine. You might know my writing from the Vancouver Observer, or I did a lot of writing on real estate. But really, if you read the VO, you probably know my Game of Thrones recaps. And I'll be talking about the software that I use to create these memes as well. Inside their CMS, I found a way to hack artwork together. And I'm also the voice of brand for the largest cloud computing conference in the world called CloudFest, where I get to do writing around a lot of luminaries, including someone like Hank Shockley, the producer of Public Enemy, who's also an innovator in his own right, and that's really, really cool to me. My photo work, as was mentioned earlier, explores connections between animals and cities, as well as living things and human-built structures and systems. This is the Street Cat project, which explores cities through the behavior of local street cats. So by looking at the lives of feral cats, we can sort of put our finger on the pulse of a city and see what makes it tick. And that led to Street Cat Photo Booth, which is exactly what you think it is. The core street cat photo booth is animal meets camera, but there's a lot of moving parts behind it. On one hand, we have my project partner, a computer scientist and artist called Lee M. Smith, who wrote an AI to make sense of cat faces, to know what is cat and what is not. And then I had a body of over 8,000 photos of feral cats, some missing eyes, some missing ears, some missing noses, to sort of feed into this machine to create kind of a master class of cat photography for a robot. And so when the cat enters this space, it then triggers a photographic encounter and a series of images are taken. The AI then decides, is this a good picture of a cat? Is this a bad picture of the cat? Is it even a cat? And then if the answer is yes, it's good, it sends it up to social media, in this case Twitter, or an adoring audience gets to gush over these kings and queens for a day. And then the next phase of the project will involve triggering a cryptocurrency mining exercise to send money into the hands of cat support groups that are locally relevant to where these animals are. So essentially, we plan to put these animals into the gig economy, but that's going to be the next phase of this project. So how do you build something like this? You don't see many cat photographers driving Maseratis with low and sometimes no operating budgets. You got to go DIY. And my number one rule, in fact my only rule, is use what you have. So I ideated this project in a free application called SketchUp. In this case, the idea was for Street Cat Photo Booth to mimic the locales of where the animals are encountered. In this case, Tokyo, which is characterized by these really long, small, and narrow apartments into which people live often alone. So I built the core structures, and then from their library of existing 3D elements, populated it with computer equipment, and then you even had cats that you can spin three-dimensionally. They can even give you the evil eye. It's amazing just how detailed these can be. So that's the first tool I'd like to highlight is SketchUp. Its new free version isn't quite as good as the old one, but it's still incredibly useful. The learning curve can be a little frustrating, but it's worth checking out. If any of your friends are interior designers or architects, they will be familiar with this. Street Cat Photo Booth itself was built out of a Raspberry Pi headless computer attached to a webcam, the kind that you would pull out of a laptop or get for like $15 from a cheap computer store. And it's powered by a battery, USB battery, the same kind you use to charge your mobile phone on the go. The shelter itself was made from a storage tub that I got from a discount store. And to make the space comfortable for cats, Lee had salvaged carpet from a failed bank in Manhattan. And the carpet was the same green color as money. It's fantastic. So we cut it up in his underground lab space and put it together. We basically held everything inside the tub with duct tape. This was what his workspace looked like, and this is how we trained it. We have the camera, the motion sensor, we have the Raspberry Pi, we have its power source, and then we have a photo of a cat on which we're training it. So as you can see, this is not the MIT Visual Arts Center. I mean, he had to hand build the HVAC system for his workspace. That's what you have to do to get affordable space in New York. Here's the original test of Street Cat Photo Booth in an alley in central Brooklyn. As you can see, it looks like a bomb, so we were really nervous about taking this thing on the subway with its blinking lights and stuff. So apparently that if you see something, say something thing isn't as rock solid as people hope. The cats loved it. We demoed it later in Tokyo, and I got a different shelter space to approximate, as we mentioned before, the living spaces. And this green felt I actually got from Dresso down in Hastings for like $1. And I chose the color because it matches the branding of the Tokyo Metro. And the cats were queuing for it. They were very polite and very curious about it. It was fantastic. And this is what the output looks like. Again, use what you have. Even though we have a computer scientist in our team, we're not going to reinvent the wheel. Twitter has a mega infrastructure, so we're going to use that. And we know Twitter is friendly to bots. So we just have the output from Street Cat Photo Booth go to Twitter right away. And these are images were taken by the machine in Manizales, Colombia, where we were presenting as part of the International Symposium on Electronic Art. Locals loved it. The cats were cool with it. One guy thought it was a bomb, and that was like really hard to explain. Like, no, I'm not here to assassinate street cats with an IED. Like, why would anybody do that? You know. The Raspberry Pi is a headless computer. So that basically means it's a small computer that doesn't have a mouse, a keyboard, or a screen. You can attach all those and configure it to do whatever you want. It's really good for doing more complicated computing tasks in a very small body. So if you're building a robot or something that actually has to do processing locally, Raspberry Pi is a really good example. The Raspberry Pi 2 had a very steep learning curve. Lee is like a world-class computer scientist, so our mileage will vary when trying to configure this thing. The new version, though, is much easier to use. It comes pre-bundled with Linux most times. You can attach a screen and keyboard to it and configure it right out of the box. It's super cheap as well. You can get a kit for like $100. Next to it, you see the Arduino, which is a microprocessor. That's used for more simple data crunching tasks and actuation. So you can use it for simple robots. You can use it for sensory tools like a weather sensor or a moisture sensor for your plants. I taught myself how to use Arduino in something like 2 weeks, and I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed. You can get a kit for about $35 that would come with the Arduino, as well as lots of connectors and breadboards and actuators and lights and stuff. So even if you screw it up a few times and blow out some LEDs, you'll still have loads of them left. I highly recommend getting these, even just as a toy, even if you're just going to mess around. It will open whole new doors with what you can do with your artwork. Neither of these have I ever seen in a store in Vancouver, but they're very, very, very easy to find online.
The electronic stores have them.
Yes, yeah. I searched all over and could not find them, but I just found that on the internet in like literally 5 minutes. I was there. Not even figuratively, I could actually find it in like 5 minutes. So we'll move to a different project. This one is called Misunderstood, Duologue with a Broken Machine, and it explores the relationship between two imperfect entities, one an AI language translator and one a human reader. So it creates this battle of attrition between two entities that are really just trying their best. The embodied performance aligns between echo and challenge and repetition, and the physicalized version of it is sort of like a Ouija board, which is a lot like how we embrace our digital technology. We're reaching out into the ether for these really easy answers, but all we get back are these arbitrary signals and we try to make sense of it. Warsaw on 14th August 2012, item 925. Regulation, the Minister of Home Affairs and the wool. On the formula, the application form of confirms, to confirm, have ownership or loss of citizenship, Polish. Pursuant to Article 58, active 2nd April, Fade Algae Lane, citizenship, Polish, debt 2012. Half of item 161 managed. The following. Regulation determines the pattern of the application form to confirm ownership or loss of how I wish citizenship, Polish. Model of the application form to confirm drop, confirmation of ownership or loss of civil, the Polish, okay, specified in to regulation. Shall enter into, come into force. Before completing the application, please refer to the teaches, the concepts, the instructions set out on page 12. Request be completed in English, Polish, English. The applicant. Hit and I'll John and John, a mile and address headquarters, state, province. Use what you have. That's my number one rule. And the idea for this project came to me really quickly, and I wanted to capitalize on that momentum So I essentially rushed home and just, what do I have under my sink? How can I make this project happen now? Originally, I envisioned doing it in this like clean white room. It would be like this full body shot. I was like, no, I have this really retro looking wall in my old apartment, so I'll shoot up against that. The tools that I used were my work camera, which is a Fujifilm X-T1 on a tripod, to be the third party view of the event. The machines I view was supplied by my phone, which in this case was a Google Nexus that was whose back was held together with super glue. And then the Ouija board element was made with an upside down IKEA freezer tray to which the phone was taped with painter's tape. And the entire project was controlled by the phone, whose actions I would trigger one after the other and then start the performance. So the phone was controlling the Fujifilm camera. It was also recording audio, and then it was also doing the screen capture of Google Translate, which was also running in real time on there. So I had to do quite a few takes because the phone kept crashing. And eventually I had to cut the audio recording and record that separately. The video was cobbled together in iMovie, which came for free with my computer. So it's cool that it was free, but the problem is that iMovie just isn't very good. But that added a little bit of friction to it, but you know, you gotta use what you have. And because I was getting all the signal on the line to the audio, when I could get the thing not to crash, I had to record the audio track separately. And since I don't have a recording studio in my apartment, I went into my bathroom, closed the door, pulled the shower curtain shut, and basically just shouted into my laptop, reading what had been recorded earlier, then spliced that together in the audio. So the screen recording software I used was called DU Recorder, and it's free. You can get it for iOS and Android, and it's pretty cool. It has these tooltips that pop up. You just start recording and then it disappears, and then it just starts recording anything that's going on your phone, including the lock screen, which is pretty neat. And then you pull it down from the top to stop and export it to either an audience or to whatever you're going to edit it in. If you want to edit on your desktop machine or laptop machine, there's another wonderful tool called Record It, which is a screen cap to GIF software. So you select either your whole screen or just an element of the screen that you want to record in, just get it going, and then it processes it into the output of a GIF, which is great if you want a really lightweight video element to put onto a website, especially if your audience is looking out on a phone or if they don't have a lot of computing power. This is a really quick and dirty way to get an embeddable video ready. For something slightly higher end, there's something called OBS, which is Open Broadcaster Software, which is in fact what the webcast tonight is being done on. It's a bit more pro. You can not only record your screen, but you can record from outgoing sources and mix them together. For a free piece of software, OBS is incredibly pro. Let's talk briefly about yet another art project. This one, no one's under 18? Cool. This one is called SpankBank, Notional User Interface. Back when Google Glass was released, I had written in some article or another, the dev teams for every online porn outfit on the web are watching the Google Project Glass video and thinking, we can create an app that matches sex footage from our libraries to the body positions of passersby spotted by augmented reality glasses. I promise you that's what they're thinking. So when the iPhone X came out, I was reminded of that feature. So I started putting together an artwork around that dynamic. And the idea being that the participant in the artwork would encounter this bare mattress in the middle of the floor, and there would be a phone tethered really closely in the middle of the mattress. You'd have to climb out and pick it up, and then you work your way through this interface. So I started putting it together what the notional app workflow would look like. So upon selecting SpankBank from your phone, it gets really easy. All you have to do is creep up on a stranger who's really just trying to do their thing, isolate their face, take the photo, and then choose how you want to apply it, populate the destination clip with the other faces that you've creeped upon earlier. Are you happy? If you're using an app like this, deep down you're probably not. And then you play back your creepy masterpiece. Still image, we'll play the video. Now comes the even worse part. Of course there's a paywall. So I stopped work on this project when I read somewhere that such apps were already out in the wild. So it was no longer a notional. It was kind of no point in doing it because it was already out there. People could use it for real if they want to. Please do not go use software like this. This was done entirely in an application called Mockups, which is a wireframing piece of software for project managers and product managers. This was all done in the free version. I would have hit the image limit because it only lets you upload a certain number of images for the free version. Had I gone through and populated with everything, I would have hit the image limit, and which I didn't do. Also because I'm not going to broadcast porn from the Vancouver Public Library.
No.
Enough about me. Let's look at some other disciplines that are out there. First though, back up everything. When you're working with free tools or cheap tools or DIY setups, make sure everything that you record has a backed up version. So if the tool suddenly disappears from the internet or it breaks or then the spec changes or you switch devices and it's no longer supported, you won't lose all your work. So please back everything up, which you should be doing with all your work anyway. Things can break. Testing with some of these apps may not be as robust as it is for paid apps. This is the nature of the beast. You know, just like, you know, when the Ramones were carrying their guitars in the shopping carrier bags, those things could break more easily than a guitar case would. For all those photographers out there or people who use cameras in their artwork, if you're a professional photographer, you're going to have to be using Adobe Creative Suite. That's just the way it is. You're going to be expected to be proficient in Photoshop, Lightroom, probably Camera Raw, or maybe some of the really fancy pantses out there will be using Phase 1's Capture One. But if saving a couple $100 on software means that you can put a more meaningful investment into your camera equipment, fucking do it. And then start out using some of the cheaper and free software that's out there to get that leg up. Especially if you're using your photographic practice, not necessarily to service clients or to service a company, but in the service of another artwork. This is the GIMP. It's the GNU Image Manipulation Program. It's been around for a very long time. It's a Photoshop-like editing suite that's available for free for Mac users, Windows users, and Linux users. The files that you generate in GIMP are mostly operational with Adobe Creative Suite, but mostly. So with this, I don't recommend French kissing with this. Like if you're working in GIMP, only work in GIMP. If you're working in Photoshop, only work in Photoshop. Because when you mix the two, something weird can happen. It can be very hard to fix. So if you're a professional photographer, use Photoshop. It's worth $20 a month. It's the industry standard. It has design elements because you're inevitably going to have to work with a designer. GIMP is great though if you're just breaking into the business and if you're using your photography, as I said, for something other than servicing a client. If you're looking for a more lightweight tool, I suggest Snapseed, which is now owned by Google. I describe it as 70% Instagram, 30% Lightroom. For a free tool, it is incredibly feature-rich, though the learning curve is a little bit steep because its user interface is a little bit different than what Instagram has trained us how to do. It's crazy what you can do with this tool. I really like Snapseed. If you're looking for something even lighter weight that you can use on your desktop, there's a browser-based application called Pixlr, which requires you to run Flash. Some of you might or might not want to do that. And Pixlr has two flavors. There's a basic version, which is mostly good just for doing overlays and memes. I use that for the previous stuff that you saw for the Vancouver Observer for my Breaking Bad and Game of Thrones memes. And then their full version is a little bit more Photoshop-like, where you can upload layers and bring in image links as layers and then edit them similarly to how you would with Photoshop. This is a good way to learn techniques before springing on expensive software. Snapseed is for Android and iOS, and Pixlr is just browser-based, but you can run it on anything that runs a browser. For those who are illustrators, two suggestions. One is Adobe Illustrator Draw, which is for vector artwork and drawing. You can share the output from this with your Adobe Creative Suite, or just dump it as its own product. It's free. Concepts is another free app. It's an enhanced sketchbook tool. It's more advanced on iOS than it is on Android, but it is quite powerful. Both of these work on Android and iOS. Concepts works on Android and iOS, as well as Windows 10 and also on Chrome OS. I don't know if any of you guys use Chromebooks. They're pretty cool. Yeah, not that many people do, but they are pretty cool. So a few of these apps will be Chromebook friendly. One more, this is iPastels. It's free. Its sole purpose in life is to mimic the look and feel of painting in pastels, which could be fun for collages or just if that's the type of artwork you like to do. Hashtag Cameron. Hashtag cat drawing. Hashtag my cat. Now let's get into a little bit of filmmaking software. Screenwriters. I mean, you can fire up any word processor you like, set everything to Courier 12, and just pay extra special attention to formatting. But the formatting is not only a nightmare for screenwriters, it is also the #1 gatekeeper for keeping those who want to get into the screenwriting game from getting into the screenwriting game. Leave it to a piece of software that will do the margin squinting for you. Final Draft is the industry standard with the best features and the best beat control. There's a reason it's the industry standard. It's also not cheap. But you have options. You have free options. One of them is Amazon's StoryWriter. Unless you're using the aforementioned Chromebook, you have to be online to use StoryWriter. But it is basically screenwriting and storyboarding software that's free and can run on Mac or PC as well. There is also one called Causality, which is more of a beat board for visual storytelling. Someone like me who does a little bit of screenwriting, but mostly I work on the story side, something like Causality is really up my alley to keep track of all the moving parts. And then whoever I'm working with can use something like this to put it into comprehensive screenwriting order. These are all browser-based. So some of you who have done screenwriting before are probably wondering why I haven't mentioned Celtex yet. And for two reasons. One, it's no longer free, but it's also no longer just a screenwriting app. It's now become this amazing production management app. So you can use it to handle budgeting, you can use it to handle breakdowns, you can use it to handle sides, shot lists, call scheduling, and all sorts of stuff like that. You can run it in anything that runs a browser. It is, as I say, no longer free. It's about $20 a month now for the production management suite. But if any of you are involved with educators, there is an education discount, but you have to contact Celtex to get a sense of what that is. Oh, this is one of my favorites. I've loved Sunseeker ever since the iPhone came out, because to me it really pointed out the promise of pocket-sized computing for creative types. What this is you bring Sunseeker to a location that you're scouting for a shoot, and it will tell you where the sun is going to be at each time of day. It is perfect for cinematographers and photographers, location scouts. It's also really good for landscapers and gardeners, or I guess if you're a plant. Android has a free light version as well as a $9 paid version. It is a $10 app only for iPhone because I guess Apple just assumes that we are all figuratively made of money. For those into music, music collaboration software is a bit of a blind spot for me because I'm not a musician. However, I do know of a pretty good audio mastering application called Lander, mainly because my project partner Lee is the senior research engineer for this project. And this is an artificially intelligent audio mastering tool for that last stage of the production process. They also do sampling and distribution to connect indie artists to platforms. Automated on-the-fly mastering is obviously a game changer. So if you're a musician or a producer, I highly encourage you to check this application out. It's not free, but it is very cheap. It's $1 a month if you just want to use it for output, and about $25 a month for the full mastering and top quality output. Writing. We're going to have to talk about writing, aren't we? Finding a good writing application is deceptively hard to do. There's a lot of junk out there, and then the basic stuff that we start with is not that bad to begin with. So we get our machine and it comes with like a notepad, or it might come with Word or Pages or even LibreOffice. And they're okay, but it always makes you feel like you're working in a beige cubicle. And Google Docs isn't much better than that, but it does have collaboration features which can be handy, and then you all feel like you're working in a beige cubicle. But sometimes you just want to focus and get stuff done. AI Writer is the one that I use. It's a focused writing app that just gets out of the way. If you want to add any format, you have to do it in markup. So it encourages you just to start dumping words, which I love because sometimes that's all that I need to do. There's another one called Novelist, which is, as the title suggests, for building a novel. So you can not only write, but arrange scenes and set yourself chapter and word count goals. It's free, but it's actually quite well supported. The developer of this app is super responsive to feedback. There's another one called Draft, which is browser-based, and it offers control and collaboration features so that when you're changing something in someone else's draft, you don't have to change the whole thing. You can just accept and change individual things. So it's a little bit more granular in terms of collaboration than something like Google Docs is. A writer like me has never really encountered the need to make the jump from Google Docs to AI Writer, but one thing Draft has that Google Docs doesn't is something called Hemingway mode. So it doesn't turn you into like a drunk, belligerent jerk, and it doesn't fill your house with cats. But what it does do is disable all the editing keys on your keyboard. So you can only write, you cannot edit. So it makes you imitate that write drunk, edit sober ethos. So AI Writer is free for Android, but it's $9 for iOS. Novelist is only for Android, but it is free. And Draft is browser-based, and it is free. Project management software is not just for the startup anymore. It's not just for the office. If you work for an arts organization, or if you're a theater maker, or if you're a film producer, you need to organize a lot of people and organize a lot of ideas. A lot of you would probably use something like Asana or Trello. I've used Trello in so many different startup scenarios. But recently I was introduced to one called MeisterTask, which I like even more. It looks and feels a lot like Trello, but it has a mind mapping feature for brainstorming that I absolutely love. I prefer it to Trello. It has a pretty good free version as well. And how many out here like to work for exposure? Or like to work for page views? I didn't think so, and you should probably never do that. So this is one called Paymo. It's a freelancer project management and invoicing app. So it has multiple payment levels, but the freelancer version is free. And it allows you to track your time and keep tabs of your different projects, and then output those into invoicing to make it really easy to be your own accounts receivable person, which of course you have to do. And you can designate it per client and per project, which is pretty cool. This is browser-based, and it also runs on Android and iOS. Thank you guys so much for listening. You can find me on jordanmatthewyearman.com, on Twitter and Instagram, I'm Jordan Yearman, on YouTube, I'm Jed Yearman, LinkedIn, I'm Jordan Yearman. You didn't have to write any of that down. Hopefully none of you were scribbling too fast. You can hit this QR code or this link to get a list of all the applications that I talked about in this presentation. I did it in Google Docs because in this case it really was the right tool for the right job. Thank you all so much for your attention, and let me know if you have any questions.
I have a question. How did you get the cats to go into the photo booth?
Patience. And it's really interesting that you asked that. Depending on the city, the cats will behave in these very different ways. We found that the cats in New York City were very, not aggressive, but they were very curious, and they liked to explore new things and in places that they had never been. So we set up Street Cat Photo Booth for the very first time in this really just disgusting alley in Midwood. And the cats were surrounded by all this shitty takeaway food that had been thrown out. It was disgusting. But we set up this booth, had a little bit of kibble. I don't know how they could have smelled it in that rank-ass alley. But they explored it because it was a cool-looking box with lights. So let's check this out. All right. And then when we did the second test in Greenpoint, we didn't even have to have the food. We just set up the box. And a few feral cats were just looking. And Lee and I were hiding behind this truck. Again, these two guys with hoodies ran up and put this box with lights and wires next to this municipal car park and ran away and hid, and no passersby did anything. And so we waited for about 15 minutes and the first cat went in. In Hong Kong, the cats were much more reticent because there's a history of locals poisoning the cats. So we had to climb up onto the roofs in the Kowloon alleyways, which was an adventure in and of itself, and set up these boxes on the roof and wait for the cats to go up. In Tokyo, they went into them right away as well. And in Vancouver, the cats were all about the food. The feral cats in Vancouver, which are very hard to find in the first place, would not go into the box unless there was at least something in it for them.
Why did you find stray cats in Vancouver? I mean,
Vancouver Orphan Kitten Rescue, in exchange for my volunteering to do glamour portraits for cats that need to be adopted, they let me know a site where some caretakers look after feral cats, but I'm not allowed to tell anyone where it is. There are only around 100 feral cats in Vancouver proper, and through trap neuter release, that number is getting lower and lower. In Surrey, there are way, way, way more, including feral rabbits and feral turtles. Like there's like a turtle problem in Surrey. It's weird.
there's a ton of feral cats in Ottawa.
Yeah.
Apartment building. Yeah. How do you keep up with the new gadgets, with the new everything that's coming on the market? I guess once because you're in this world, right? So you're just it's hard, yeah.
It's hard. In fact, when doing this presentation, I had to redo about a third of it this morning because I was double checking to make sure some of these apps were still online. I was like, no. So I was like, oh, better find some new ones. So that was exciting. But yeah, I have to constantly keep an eye on what's new. I spend a lot of time in the Android App Store looking at the top free apps and scrolling through to see, what's new and what's interesting. And I always try to read on new mobile phone technology development, software development. I try to keep my eye on art scenes to see what people more clever than me are doing, because there's always someone doing something that you would have never thought of. Yeah, but I have to do, between my professional work for other clients and my creative work, I have to do a lot of research. So much of making art is looking at what other people are doing. It's really kind of fun, and you can go down rabbit holes. Some of these rabbit holes have actual rabbits.
Gerda, what blogs and podcasts are you paying attention to that you think would help with this space?
Ooh. I love a creative podcast called Shortcuts, which is mainly storytelling. The woman who hosts it has the most beautiful voice in the world. I really like one called Talking Machines. I don't know that it's still being maintained, but it was divided into two halves. One is more AI and machine learning for more lay people. I used to work as a coder back in the day. I don't really do it anymore, but I'm definitely more of a lay person when it comes to AI. And then they have the second half of the show is for like people who are deep into it professionally. It is fantastic. They go into stuff like generative art, which is people making machines that make art, and natural language processing, and NLP for language translation. I think that Talking Machines is a wonderful podcast. I also really like Reply All, which is an internet culture podcast, where people take what looks like a tech problem and explore kind of the forces around it. If you don't know anything about stuff like Reddit and 4chan, you will by the time you listen to that podcast. Yeah. And I listen to a lot of history podcasts, a lot of true crime podcasts. I love the Mortified podcast, which is people reading from their teen and tween journals. It's amazing.
So you mentioned at the beginning that you're interested in human, plant, and machine relationships. Are you working on any projects with planets?
I'm so glad you asked. I'm working on two, neither of which are really mentioned in this because I haven't found a way to do it without using expensive software and hardware. One of them is about, I'm calling it Contraband, and it's I'm going to be doing it in conjunction with an artist in Seattle, hopefully, once we get our shit together and make this happen. But it's about smuggling sunlight from Canada into the United States and smuggling sunlight from the United States into Canada, each to to feed a plant that's being kept in a completely dark room. And the idea is we take live video footage and signal process it into an array of LED grow lights to abstract that image and surround the plant and help it to grow. So someone coming to see this exhibition or whatever you call it will first see the image that a human would see, and then they would see how we've transposed that image into electronic plant food. And then the other one is a more complicated project that explores late-stage capitalism through forcing plants to paint. And the problem to solve there is a machine vision problem, is how do I get a machine to look at a plant and assess how much it has grown. And so these I need to find the right collaborators because I'm just nowhere near clever enough to do this by myself. So these are, probably won't get to these this year, but I want to get to them soon. Yeah. So that's some of my plant stuff going on. Aside from just, putting my plants in my pop-up photo studio and giving them whatever portraits.
How do you divide your time? Because your artwork also takes time.
Mm-hmm.
And to create and then do it yourself and everything you describe, and then following what's new in the market and following other artists and doing your writing. So how do you do all of this?
Insomnia helps.
Okay.
Time management, anyone who works as a freelancer, if you're a student or a busy professional, know how important time management is. And I have to be ruthless with myself. Like 25 minutes to read Reddit, and then once that's that 25 minutes done, gotta get back to work. I'm like, I'm gonna give myself half an hour to research new stuff, and then it's done. It helps when my clients are like on the phone, like, oh, we need you to do this, and that kind of pulls me out of that reverie. I like to try to down tools for client-based work at around 6 p.m. and then after that is kind of my time. And so that could mean watching something on Netflix, or it could mean working on an art project, depending on how much energy I have. Yeah. None of us are creative machines, especially once we get out of our 20s. We don't always have the energy to do this day in, day out the way we used to. When I was living in New York, all I did was work to pay the rent, scrounge for beer money, and try to get into theater and make art. That was all I did. And now I'm like, you know what? I just want to sit on the couch and watch Travelers on Netflix.
What social media platforms do you like?
Instagram is the one that I care the most about. Twitter to me is just like a cesspool of garbage or a quagmire of bullshit, depending on like which mental model you want to use for that. That said, I do use Twitter mainly for broadcast, like announcing things that I'm doing and following Game of Thrones chatter. And we use Twitter for Street Cat Photo Booth because the API is bot friendly. I mean, obviously half of Twitter is bots. But we wanted to use Instagram because aesthetically it was just more pleasing. But the problem was they changed their API so that if you wanted to run an autonomous agent against it, you had to contact them in person, which we did, and they never got back to us. So we were just like, okay, fine, we're just going to use Twitter now. So that's what we did. I would like to go back. Instagram, if you're watching. I use LinkedIn because I have to, but I hate it. I use YouTube for some of my video stuff. If you go to YouTube, smash that like button, hit subscribe. My YouTube channel is super weird. It's very non-thematic. It'll have everything from cats exploring the Street Cat Photo Booth to robots building a car to like a department store opening in Tokyo. It's really a mixed bag. But those are my social media. My main social media usage is Instagram, which I use almost every day.
Sorry, just another question here for you, Jordan, is what are the conferences or festivals that you think are most important for people who are doing multimedia art with digital elements?
The Push Festival is a must-see. It's we mostly think of it as a performing arts festival, but there is a tremendous amount of mixed media art in there, and it's dope. The New Forms Festival has changed its format a little bit, but that's a great way to explore where things like dance, theater, and installation art mix. Going to conferences, the International Symposium on Electronic Art is the big one. It moves around every year. not this year, but I think the year after it's going to be in Canada again. I think it's going to be in Edmonton, if I'm remembering that correctly. I might be wrong. This year, Isaiah is going to be in South Korea, and that's going to take place in June. More and more, I'm starting to even recommend something like CloudFest, where you meet a lot of creative people there. The keynote speakers tend to be creatives. This year, our keynote speaker was Hank Shockley from Public Enemy. So again, we also had the CIO of Williams Formula One. So you get to see how distributed computing can affect things from business to art. I would keep an eye out for all that sort of stuff. And then places like San Francisco and New York, I would look at the different galleries and museums and have an eye on what sort of electronic stuff is popping up and go to the artist talks for those. And there you will not only get the gist of what the artist was conceiving when she put the project together, but you'll meet like-minded people in the same place.
And where's CloudFest?
It's in southern Germany in an amusement park called Europa Park. If you work for a company, get them to send you.
No, that's I will add one that it's in Austria. It's Ars Electronica. It's
Yeah.
They do amazing, and every September, early September, they have amazing international festival. But it's spelled ARS, Arts Electronic in Linz in Austria. So they do. This is what they do. That's their work, and they're in 23rd century. Everything it is just no seriously. It's just amazing.
Yeah, it's Isaiah have a lot of projects that were born at Ars Electronica. It's quite amazing. And I'm remiss for not remembering that. Thank you very much for throwing that in there. Also, SFU does a lot of electronic art as well. So keep an eye out for SFU's exhibitions and presentations. Cool. Thank you all so much for your attention.
Thank you.